Every province has mysteries, but Ontario is different. This is not some remote corner with folklore and campfire tales. This is the most populated province in Canada. 14 million people, centuries of documented history, thousands of kilometers mapped by surveyors, studied by geologists, analyzed by scientists with equipment so sensitive it can detect magnetic shifts from space. And yet, across this heavily studied landscape, there are places that refuse to be explained. Not legends, not stories that grew stranger over time. Real locations, places you can visit right now, places where experts have stood with instruments in hand and walked away more confused than when they arrived. Here is what nobody talks about. Ontario has more officially documented unexplained geological and historical anomalies per square kilometer than any other province in Canada. That is not an exaggeration. Cross-reference geological survey reports with Parks Canada archives and university databases, and a pattern emerges. The word probably appears in scientific papers about Ontario far more than it should for a place this studied. The phrase "further research needed" shows up in conclusions about sites that have been examined for generations. And sometimes, the official explanation just stops, replaced by careful professional silence. 10 locations, each one verified, each one documented, each one carrying a question the sharpest minds have looked at and chosen not to answer. Some of them will make you question what you thought you knew about this province. One of them sits directly beneath the feet of millions who walk over it every day without knowing. Another involves a collision so violent it may have changed the course of life on Earth itself. By the end, you will see Ontario completely differently, and you will understand why some places are not meant to be fully explained. Number 1. Niagara Falls. The underwater anomalies. 5,000 photographs are taken at Niagara Falls every single hour. Almost none of those tourists think about what is happening underneath. Beneath the falls, in bedrock carved by water over 12,000 years, there are tunnel systems and cavern formations that do not match the erosion patterns geologists would predict. Geological surveys identified sections of riverbed erosion that point toward ancient water flow directions that contradict the current course of the river entirely. The standard explanation involves glacial activity from the last ice age. That explanation is reasonable. It is also incomplete. Certain cavern shapes and erosion depths do not fully align with what glacial retreat models predict. Niagara Falls draws 14 million visitors every year. Almost none of them know they are standing above a geological story that has not been fully written yet. Town number 2, Kingston. The fortifications that should not have been necessary. Fort Henry stands above Kingston on a rise that commands sightlines across the water. It was constructed between 1832 and 1836 as a defensive installation to protect the city and the vital waterway it controlled. Here is where the official version becomes interesting. By the time Fort Henry was completed, the primary military threat it was designed to counter had already passed. The massive investment was made at precisely the moment when many military analysts believed such a fortification was no longer necessary at the scale it was being built. Fort Henry was never attacked, not once. It never fired its guns in defense. Historians offer deterrence theory as explanation, but that does not fully account for the scale of investment or certain sections of the underground tunnel network that were sealed and have never been fully documented in publicly available records. Above the city of 134,000 people, Fort Henry still watches the water, and the full reason it was built the way it was remains a question historians answer with the word probably. Number 3. The Niagara Escarpment, the hidden coral reef. There is a coral reef inside Ontario, an ancient one, preserved in bedrock, that existed approximately 450 million years ago when this land sat near the equator beneath a shallow tropical sea. The Niagara Escarpment is largely composed of fossilized remnants of this reef system. It is one of the longest preserved reef formations in the world. What becomes difficult to explain is the distribution pattern of certain fossilized species found within the escarpment's rock layers. Marine fossils in Ontario bedrock include species whose closest relatives are found in rock formations on the other side of the Atlantic. Plate tectonics explains this in broad terms. Where it becomes complicated is in the specific distribution of certain organisms in concentrated clusters that do not align neatly with the water current patterns the ancient sea's reconstructed geography would predict. 450 million years ago, and the questions are still open. Number 4. Moose Factory, the magnetic anomaly. On James Bay, Moose Factory sits on an island in the Moose River, established as a Hudson's Bay Company trading post in 1673. 350 years of recorded human presence. The mystery is physical. The James Bay lowlands produce measurable magnetic anomalies. Compass readings in certain areas do not behave as they should. Indigenous knowledge held by Cree communities includes specific references to areas where traditional navigation methods required adjustment. The geological explanation involves deep rock formations with high iron content creating localized magnetic fields. That explanation is accepted. What has not been fully explained is why certain specific locations produce anomaly readings stronger than the underlying geology alone would account for. Surveys identified several points where magnetic variation was pronounced enough to require notation in navigation documents, but the iron content of surrounding rock did not fully explain the reading being observed. Number 5. Ottawa. The parliamentary precinct's buried layer, Parliament Hill, rises above the Ottawa River with a confidence that seems permanent. What lies beneath is considerably less certain. Archaeological surveys conducted in advance of construction projects revealed layers of human activity beneath the current structures that extend back considerably further than Confederation. Indigenous presence in the Ottawa Valley predates European contact by thousands of years. What has not been fully resolved is the relationship between certain underground features of the parliamentary precinct, passages and chambers that appear in historical engineering documents, and the pre-existing landscape that was modified when construction began. Ottawa has 1 million people today, and underneath the most photographed buildings in Canada, the ground holds a record that is still being carefully read. Number 6. Sudbury, the crater that changed Earth. The Sudbury Basin looks like a scar from the air. Approximately 1.85 billion years ago, a meteorite struck here with an impact force so enormous, it was one of the largest impact events in the entire geological history of the planet. The impact created the Sudbury Igneous Complex, the source of some of the richest nickel and copper deposits ever found. 80,000 people live there today because of what that ancient collision deposited. The mystery sits inside this verified story. The Sudbury impact occurred 1.85 billion years ago. Early complex life began appearing approximately 800 million years ago. Researchers studying large impacts have identified a pattern where major events correlate with significant shifts in evolutionary trajectory. What that means for Sudbury, one of the largest impacts in Earth's history occurring when life was still finding its fundamental shapes, is a question researchers in astrobiology and evolutionary biology have been examining with increasing interest. Number 7. Quetico Provincial Park, the pictographs. With no agreed explanation. Along rock faces lining Quetico's lakes, there are pictographs, red ochre images painted directly onto stone above the waterline. These were created by Ojibwe and their ancestors, some believed to be several hundred years old. What has not been resolved is the precise meaning and function of specific images. Beyond interpretation, there is a physical question. Several painted sites are located in positions that required significant effort to reach, accessible only from the water, in specific positions requiring a canoe to be held steady against current while the work was done. What that level of effort and care, applied in locations clearly chosen deliberately, tells us about the people who made them is a conversation that combines archaeology, indigenous knowledge systems, and humility. Number 8. Toronto, the buried river running beneath the city. Under Toronto, the Don River's original tributaries are still flowing. As the city grew, Those waterways were culverted, encased in concrete tunnels below the developing city. The rivers that shaped the original landscape are still there, still flowing, underneath the city that decided it did not need to see them anymore. The mystery is not the burial itself. It is what happens inside those culverts and at points where buried waterways connect to Toronto's storm sewer system and subway infrastructure. Toronto has experienced flooding events where water appeared in locations that should not have received that volume given the known infrastructure. Engineering investigations identified water movement patterns that did not fully match the mapped culvert system. There are sections of the buried river system that have not been physically inspected in decades. Toronto stands above a buried version of itself, and parts of that buried version are still doing things the people above have never fully mapped. Number 9. Serpent Mounds, the ancient structure. On the north shore of Rice Lake, there is a series of earthwork mounds. The largest is shaped like a serpent, a long curving ridge of earth that stretches approximately 55 meters and has been there for approximately 2,000 years. The serpent mounds were created by people of the Hopewell tradition, characterized by sophisticated burial practices and long-distance trade networks. Trade goods found in Hopewell burial contexts in Ohio have been traced to the Rocky Mountains, the Gulf of Mexico, and the Great Lakes. The reach of that trade network and the organization required to sustain it implies a level of social complexity that older historical narratives about pre-contact North America significantly underestimated. 2,000 years ago, someone decided this specific bend of lakeshore was the right place to shape the earth into the form of a serpent. The full meaning of what they built is still open. Number 10. The Thousand Islands, the geological jigsaw. Approximately 1,864 islands are scattered across a 50-kilometer stretch of the St. Lawrence River. The rock that forms them is Precambrian shield granite, over 1 billion years old in some formations. The geological mystery involves the precise history of how the Frontenac Arch was shaped. The standard glacial model explains broad features. What it does not fully explain is the specific distribution of certain geological features, the depth profiles of certain channels between islands, and the relationship between above-water and below-water geology in specific sections. Marine geological surveys identified features suggesting the river's course through this area has shifted more significantly over time than the current landscape implies. Channels that appear to have once carried significantly more water. The rock is holding a geological record that the models have not finished reading. 10 places, all real, all documented, all still holding questions the best science has not fully answered. This is what Ontario actually is, not just cities and highways. A landscape built on mysteries stretching back hundreds of millions of years. A place where we can map Mars in detail, but cannot fully explain why certain rocks beneath Niagara carved the way they did. Where we detect black holes across the universe but still debate why Fort Henry was built at that scale. Where ancient peoples shaped Earth into serpents for reasons we are only beginning to understand. We live in the most studied province in Canada. 14 million people, centuries of research. And yet, the ground is still teaching us things we did not know we needed to learn. Beneath Parliament Hill, there are passages not fully documented. Beneath Toronto, water moves through tunnels not inspected in decades. At Sudbury, a scar from an impact 2 billion years ago connects to how life itself became possible. The world is older and stranger than any single explanation contains. If this changed how you see Ontario, hit that like button. If you know someone who needs to see this, share it with them. And if you want more mysteries uncovered, subscribe because we are just getting started. The next time you stand at Niagara Falls, remember what is underneath. The next time you walk through Toronto, remember what still flows beneath your feet. Ontario is not just what you see on the surface, it is everything waiting underneath, and some of that will always be just out of reach, which is exactly how it should be.